But Lord, I'm not eloquent. Neither before nor since you have spoken to your servants. I've never been eloquent. I'm slow of speech and I'm slow of tongue. Oh, is that right? I didn't realize that, but Moses, I got another question for you. Who is it that made your mouth? Who is it that made your tongue? You take my word to the people, and I'll take care of its efficacy. I made your mouth. I made your tongue, and here's my word. You use your mouth, and you use your tongue, and I'll take care of the rest. So what is the task of apologetics? In the first place, it is not to tell the world that we're sorry that we're Christians. We don't apologize for being believers in Christ. The word apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, which means literally to give a reply. And its function in the early church was various. In the first instance, we see the pattern of the preaching and teaching of the Apostle Paul and the other apostles in the book of Acts. It was Paul's custom into every village that he went to go first to the synagogue and be involved in dialogue or reasoning there, and then to the agora, to the marketplace. If you've ever been to Athens and gone to the Acropolis, the Parthenon, and you stand there on the steps, and if you look right across the way, you see the remains of the Areopagus, Mars Hill, that small mesa, as it were, right across from the Parthenon. And you look at that, and you can imagine the Apostle Paul preaching there to the Epicureans and to the Stoics. But if your eye just goes to the right, there's this vast plain that is also nearby where the Greek agora was in Athens. So the agora was the marketplace. And so the apostle would go where the philosophers gather, or he'd just go to the marketplace and reason and debate and preach publicly there in the city that was the monument to the high culture of the ancient world. A city that had been heralded as the citadel of truth, of the fine arts, of philosophy, of literature, of sculpture, of art, of drama. A city that when the apostle saw it, his soul was vexed and deeply troubled, because what he saw was a city that had been given over to idolatry. And so he went and he replied to the false philosophies of his day, proclaiming the truth of Christianity and answering the questions and the protests that were thrown his way. Well, at the end of the apostolic age, the intellectuals of the early Christian church continued this ministry of apologia, of apologetics, to their generation. In the second century, we think of Justin Martyr, who wrote his famous Apologia and addressed it to Emperor Antoninus Pius. And there were a couple of tasks that were being performed by the early apologist, Justin Martyr. And the first task was this, was to clarify what was really being proclaimed by the Christian church, and to clarify it in light of the false conceptions that were rumored and spread abroad. It was commonly said at the beginning of the second century, that the Christians were a seditious group that were trying to upset the authority of the Roman Empire, that they also were atheists because they didn't worship the Roman gods or the emperor, and also that they were cannibals because it was rumored that they would meet in secret every week and devour somebody's body and blood. And so it was necessary for the church to answer these false charges against it, as Justin Martyr attempted to do in his essay addressed to Antoninus Pius. He said, look, he said, we are not atheists. We believe in God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one true God. And so he first of all defended Christian theism. Secondly, he said, we are not out to overthrow the political structures of this day. In fact, it is part of our religion to pray for the kings, to give honor to the kings, to render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. And if you look at our lives, you will see that we are model citizens of civil obedience. We pay our taxes. We drive our chariots within the speed limit. You don't have to be worried about us committing crimes of murder and theft. It is true, however, that we will not recite the loyalty oath, Kaiser Kyrios, Caesar is Lord, because whatever else Caesar has, he is not Kyrios, he is not Lord. Our confession of faith is simple, Jesus ho Kyrios, Jesus is Lord. But in addition to answering these false charges, the apologists of that period and ever since also had to engage the pagan intellectuals of the day. Again, following the example of Paul at Mars Hill, where he engaged the Stoics and the Epicureans, so Justin Martyr had to deal with that remaining following of classical Platonists in his day, just as Augustine later on had to answer the philosophy of Neoplatonism and Plotinus, and as later on in church history, Thomas Aquinas had to defend the truth claims of Christianity against the Muslim philosophers who espoused a theory called integral Aristotelianism and their double truth theory. I mentioned that only in passing because it is so contemporary. The double truth theory of the integral Aristotelians among the Muslim philosophers was this: that what was true in faith could be false in reason. What was true in religion at the same time could be false in science. You could put it in the 21st century categories like this: that you would believe on Sunday that man was created in the image of God, but with equal fervor you would affirm on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday that we are cosmic accidents who have emerged fortuitously from the slime. And the problem is, both of these truths could at the same time and in the same relationship be equally true. In other words, what the integral Aristotelians did was dispense with rationality and with the test of the law of non-contradiction, of which those of you who were here earlier in the day have heard much about from Ravi and the other speakers. And so Thomas Aquinas, following Augustine, had to argue in his day that all truth is God's truth, and that anything that is true in this sphere must also be true over here, or we're kidding ourselves, because there is an internal coherency and consistency and unity of all truth. What God reveals in the Bible will never ultimately contradict what God reveals of himself in nature. So far from dividing nature and grace, Thomas Aquinas' task was to find its unity against those who would divide nature and grace. But anyway, throughout all Christian history, in every generation, there's a new philosophical movement that attacks Christian faith and truth claims. And so in every generation, the faith must be defended. And we are called to give an intellectual apologia, a reply to those alternate life views that assail the Christian faith.